Hi, I'm Stacy Bowen, and this is my presentation for my Capstone project. What I did was I developed a literacy-based curriculum for the visual arts. Okay, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about where this idea came from and how it's slowly developed throughout my master's. It all starts where I was really interested in coming up with a way to advocate for the profession of art education. So my research inquiry was really about finding evidence that supports how the arts can enhance academic learning and how it affects students as far as behaviors or thinking or even different skill sets. I sought out to answer the question, how do arts-based experiences impact academic learning and student performance? And the answers to these questions provided by the research fit into three categories. The effects of participation on students, how arts-based instruction impacts the learning environment, and how arts-based instruction contributes to literacy development. Students who had higher participation in the arts show a range of benefits that go from academic to cognitive to emotional. For example, one study showed that students who participate in the arts are more likely to show civic-minded behaviors, such as being involved in the community, participating in student government, or voting. Then there were studies that showed that the participation in arts led to lesser disciplinary issues like higher attendance and fewer infractions. And then there was different habits of thinking, like divergent and creative thinking was a result of participating in creative activities. So the research makes the case that the arts-integrated teaching or arts-based instruction can actually make a more engaged and motivated learning environment. And because of this engagement and this motivation, students are more likely to have more attention to task, or they are able to retain content for longer periods of time, or actually in a manner where they can apply it to other disciplines such as science or writing. And in fact, they also can have more thinking strategies that they capture from the different expressive or communicative activities. Researchers also found evidence that there is a positive correlation between arts-integrated reading instruction and reading improvement, which is one idea that I really put into my curriculum that I'll talk about later on. One particular study that I found interesting was where it talks about how the open-ended discussions about viewing artwork or responding to artwork actually leads to higher skills in interpretation. More particularly, like how students hypothesize, how they form observations, and how they give evidence and display more complex language. So what I proposed for my curriculum was a way to take the real tenets of visual arts or arts education, one being viewing artwork and two being creating artwork, and combining those experiences to create a curriculum that will help intervene with reading and comprehension. What I wanted was to provide a way to enhance or help students develop those critical thinking habits or habits with comprehension and really make an impact for learners who are struggling or performing lower than grade level. There are actually multiple frameworks that I try to piece together and combine in this curricular model. The first one being Feldman's model for art criticism. This is actually a very popular approach to forming an art critique and leading the discussion with your students. So there's 4 activities that you try to get the students to engage in. And the first one is describing the artwork just at its first initial response. The second one is analyzing, looking more deeply into the evidence that you view. And the third one is interpreting, trying to find the meaning of the artwork. The fourth one is judging. So what do you take away from experiencing the artwork? Is it successful or not? A second framework that I wanted to incorporate was an outline for studio habits. And what I mean by studio habits is the creative process. Now, there's some more extensive models that a lot of teachers will use, one being Studio Habits of Mind. But for this type of curriculum and for an easier way to organize the learning activities, I really try to streamline some of the popular trends that are out there and make it really basic. So I narrowed it down to 4 types of behaviors that you see in the studio process. The first one being observing. So where are you getting your inspiration from? The second one, planning, defining the objectives of your work. The third one being to actually create and make the artwork. And the fourth one is reflecting. That step also doesn't have to be like a final step. It can be one that you use all throughout the process to kind of monitor and gauge your work. The third framework that I decided to incorporate into this model is probably the most important one. This is a model for comprehension processes. More specifically, it's known as the 7 comprehension processes of proficient readers. So this is my literacy component. It's not necessarily where I'm teaching students functional literacy like phonological awareness or vocabulary acquisition. It's where I'm teaching students how to view an artwork like a text, like one that you would read, and look for certain bits of evidence by using different critical thinking skills. So how can you piece together the details that you know? How can you connect that to your own experience? And how can you build a deeper meaning? What I want is to overlap this process into critiquing and creating artwork. So this next slide shows how those 3 frameworks all kind of piece together and compare to one another. When I was thinking about potential learning activities to pair with this curriculum, I was trying to keep at the forefront best practices. According to Zemelman, some of the best practices to use for instruction is making sure that learning is cognitive, making sure learning is student-centered, and making sure learning is interactive. That being said, I wanted to make sure that students are given the freedom to pursue open-ended projects, and so that they could also collaborate with each other and respond to one another's thinkings or give each other feedback or ideas and have that sharing piece to it. The objectives for this curriculum are modeled after learning standards that target reading, writing, and visual art performance. And here I want to kind of reiterate that I'm not using texts per se that are written stories or literature, but in this capacity, I'm saying that viewing artwork is like reading an informational text, and that creating an artwork is like composing a writing piece. Because my hope is to use this curriculum as an intervention-based program, the students selected into a course that uses this curriculum would be ones who maintain scores that are below proficiency in reading and comprehension. So for example, my school uses STAR testing, so if they have lower than grade level scores on comprehension, they would be eligible for this curriculum. There is some research articles that show there is a delay in reading proficiency that occurs at like around the 4th grade level. So I'm proposing we should reach out to students before that intermediate level, and I'm using 3rd grade students for this intervention. Ideally, the class size would be probably no more than 20 students, and we would meet on a weekly basis, 3 sessions a week for 40 minutes. During each session of the week, we would be targeting a different studio skill or process, as well as focusing more deeply on just certain comprehension processes. It's unlikely that we would be incorporating every process or every step of a framework in one lesson, but we're going to take it more in depth, just 1 or 2 at a time. The first session of the week will always do an art criticism that's based on a historical or cultural example, and then the last session is another art criticism activity, but it is based on student work instead of a famous artwork. Also, during the first and second sessions, students will get the opportunity to plan and create their own work based on a direct prompt that's most likely linked to the discussion that arises from the art critique. On the next few slides, I kind of showed an exact outline for what a lesson would look like using this curriculum and the different frameworks. So for this example, I just used the topic or subject area of emotion. So students would first view examples of artwork that explain emotion, and then they would have to gather the context clues or find evidence that supports what types of emotions they connect to the examples provided. Then moving forward, they're going to kind of develop that content and that subject matter in their own terms by creating mental images or thinking about more sensory experiences. So that actually will serve as the planning phase of their own artwork. Then they have to think, how can they then present that idea in their own words or in their own thoughts to a viewer or an audience. So how does their artwork show an emotion of their choice is really the goal. As they create their own artwork, they're going to need to stop and reflect, which means self-evaluate. How is your work going? Are you conveying important ideas? Are you supporting it with evidence? Much like the act of writing or even using informational text. To finalize the week or the project, then they have to do a final presentation. They also need to create an artist statement that explains their whole process and their thinking when they are approaching this idea. So again, during these other activities like presenting or writing an artist statement or giving a peer feedback, they are also using comprehension processes. To evaluate the curriculum, I'm using a pre- and post-test model where students will be evaluated at the beginning of a course that uses the curriculum and at the end, but also midway through as like a midterm evaluation. The specific literacy skills that are going to be evaluated are skills that have to do with reading an informational text, so defining key ideas and details using supporting evidence. And then the other part of the writing evaluation is going to be how to form a point of view or craft an opinion. And that is also aligning with learning standards of reading an informational text. Student artwork is actually going to be evaluated as a writing piece, and for that we're using the artist statements that students do at the end of the week or the 3-day cycle, and the artist statement needs to show how students craft an idea and how they support it with different details and explain their process. I just wanted to end by saying thank you for your time and thank you for watching. I really hope that you took something away from this presentation about how valuable the arts is. You know, it's not always just about free form and expression, but there's a lot of core essential skills that are happening when you're learning how to create artwork. It's really, I always kind of think of it as you're learning how to think. And I think the more that we can immerse our students into this critical process and those habits of reflection, then we're creating students who know how to take a step back, how to learn about their own world, and really those are the students who are going to bring more innovation for our next generations to come.